My first night shift from Reddit user Liz Strong. Okay, I have a pretty interesting story. Please note when this happened, I would have been about 19. I'm from Australia, and I used to work at a 24/7 rural petrol station in a small town called Burham. It's on the Murphy River, and if you don't know, there are quite a few spooky stories around the river, and if you ask any local, they will have a story to tell. Anyways, when I started the job, I was told not to mind the shadows that you may see get picked up on security cameras. As these cameras were constantly recording, you could watch the cameras on a small TV behind the counter. My boss said that they would come and go around the petrol pumps, and sometimes the light would go out over the pumps. He said to ignore it, and if you want, you can stay in the back room until a customer walks in. When I asked why, what are they? In most Aussies possible way, he goes, because they aren't customers, they aren't your friends. Shit happens if you acknowledge them. With this, I started my first graveyard shift. Lucky for me, they had to put someone else on shift with me, but that did not prepare me for that night. It got to about 2 a.m. in the morning before things started getting weird. Every now and then the fridge lights would flicker or the radio would go in and out of static. But what was truly upsetting was watching this figure on the camera go back and forth just on the edge where the overhead lights for the pump stopped and beyond just being pitch dark road. The other worker, his name was Tony, could also see it and seemed to try and ignore it. Felt like he was trying not to seem spooked for my sake. Bless you, Tony. What was strange was that when the car headlights shone onto the road where the figure was pacing, it just vanished, confirming that it wasn't physical. The owner of the car finished filling up and came to the counter to pay. I tried my hardest not to look like I'd just seen a ghost, but what the man said next to me just tipped me over that night. He said, just had my first experience with a ghost car. I see his taillights and then suddenly gone. Creepy shit out of the bushes tonight. The understatement of the year. Needless to say, I am not ashamed to admit that I quit that job after 4 days, as I could not bring myself to work with another night shift at that place. And still to this day, I don't know how anybody could. It was a wild experience. We fast forward a couple months later, and I had to go to a mate's house for a bonfire on his parents' property. We would call this Gathos. We would burn off garden waste and sit around fire having a chat with a few drinks. It was always very chill. It was mid-July, so it was quite a cold night. Now, this small town, it's not so uncommon to know everybody, especially teenagers. So it was no surprise to see Tony from the petrol station at the Gatho. I knew I had to pick this guy's brain for some context of what happened that night. As soon as I sat down to chat with him, we got talking. I remember saying, you know, you got out of that place at just the right time. I asked him, why was that? Did something happen? He said, one of them managed to speak. I saw the shadow pacing, but then it started to call my name. I remember at this point, that poor Tony looked really uncomfortable. I remember his eyes getting teary when he said it sounded like my mom. She passed away when I was like 12. He struggled so hard to get the next part out. It showed up every night after that, using the same voice to ask me to come outside. I quit about 2 weeks after you did because of that, and I still can't get the voices out of my head. It sounded like my mom, but it was way too sinister. When he said that part, I felt the chills you get in your butt cheeks, the kind that you know you are being told it's legit. Even if it wasn't paranormal encounters, whatever Tony did hear or see really got him. After that, a few more of us joined in the conversation. We talked about our encounters and other things we saw out in the bush. Now I live far away. Life is completely different, but the paranormal doesn't stop. Ever since that night, I've had a huge interest in the paranormal and started to find tools for skeptical thinking. I learned pretty quick that most of the time paranormal activity can definitely be explained, but I do have a few more stories of encounters I have had but cannot explain to this day. But Burham will forever be the most haunted place I ever lived. I'm convinced that the land is haunted there. I'm going back there in the winter, back to the petrol station to see if I can capture this encounter again. If you'd like to hear more of the stories, let them know. This was a pretty eerie story read by James Eerie. Make sure you subscribe and stay tuned for more horror stories coming up.